Serika Valen was known as the perfect wife, elegant, composed, and endlessly supportive of her tech genius husband, Arlen Valen. But beneath her calm smile was a darkness no one could see. When Arlen vanished without a trace, Serika played the grieving widow flawlessly until detectives uncovered a horrifying truth. Everything she did had been secretly recorded by the man she thought she had silenced forever. Serika Valen lived in the quiet, picturesque town of Bellspire Hollow, where everything seemed calm, orderly, and perfect. Her life, from the outside, appeared to be something out of a dream. People often whispered about her elegance, how she always looked polished, how her home looked like something straight out of an architectural magazine. With her deep brown eyes, porcelain skin, and graceful demeanor, Serika was the woman others admired and envied. She was married to Arlen Valen, a successful tech entrepreneur whose name had started making waves in corporate circles. Together, they owned a large, modern home on the edge of the woods, surrounded by manicured lawns and flowering trees that gave the illusion of a life untouched by trouble. Inside the Valen home, everything had a place. The furniture was perfectly arranged, the floors spotless, and the art on the walls carefully curated. Serika prided herself on keeping everything in control. Her morning routines were precise, her meals meticulously prepared, her social calendar booked with charity events, art shows, and private dinners with elite guests. To anyone looking in, she lived a flawless life. But the truth was far more complicated. Serika was bored, deeply, bitterly bored. Each day felt like a performance. The house, the dresses, the smiling appearances, it all felt like a mask she had to wear. Beneath her graceful surface, Serika felt like she was suffocating. Arlen was kind and generous, but distant. His work consumed most of his time and energy, and Serika found herself alone more often than not. He traveled frequently, always focused on the next investment or product launch, leaving her in the big, cold house with nothing but silence and her own thoughts. At first, she tried to distract herself. She redecorated the guest room, she joined online classes, she experimented with new cuisines, but no matter how many distractions she found, the emptiness inside her remained. She began to resent Arlen, not just for his absence, but for the control he had over her life. She didn't want to play the role of the supportive wife anymore. She wanted something more, something thrilling, something dangerous. And as that desire grew, so did her thoughts of freedom. Freedom from the man who had built the cage she now lived in. Serika didn't decide to kill her husband in one moment. It was a slow progression. At first, it was just a thought, a dark, fleeting thought she pushed away. But it kept coming back stronger each time until it began to feel like the only logical conclusion. She started researching, reading stories of missing persons, unsolved murders, forensics. She paid attention to what detectives missed, to what mistakes criminals made. It became a secret obsession she planned quietly, methodically, believing that if she could just do it right, no one would ever suspect her. She started making changes around the house, subtle ones that Arlen wouldn't notice. She replaced cleaning supplies with industrial-grade chemicals. She had a new garden patch dug in the backyard, claiming she wanted to grow herbs. She donated old rugs and replaced them with ones easier to clean. She made excuses to visit hardware stores and returned with tools she claimed were for DIY projects. Everything was cataloged, documented, thought through. She rehearsed the story she would tell the police, crafted timelines in her head, practiced her facial expressions in the mirror. She even started hinting to neighbors that Arlen had been feeling off lately, mentioning that he talked about needing time alone. She laid the groundwork for a believable disappearance. She imagined herself, after it was over, standing in front of the cameras, shedding a tear, expressing confusion and sorrow, and then moving on to a new life, finally free. But what Serika didn't know, what would ultimately unravel everything, was that Arlen had secrets of his own. In the weeks before his disappearance, he had become suspicious. He noticed changes in Serika's behavior, the way she avoided eye contact, the way she smiled too much or not at all. Without telling anyone, not even her, Arlen had installed hidden cameras throughout the house, small, well placed, and cloud synced. He had begun to record everything. And while Serika moved through her carefully rehearsed life, preparing for the perfect crime, the cameras kept recording, watching, waiting. It was a damp, gray morning when Arlen Valen was first noticed missing. The air in Bellspire Hollow was heavy with moisture, the sky draped in low-hanging clouds that seemed to reflect the growing unease within the Valen estate. Serika told the world that Arlen had left on a solo retreat, a last-minute decision, she claimed, to find peace in the forested mountains north of town. She said he needed to disconnect, to escape the noise of the business world. According to her, he had packed a small bag, taken his hiking boots and a travel journal, and driven off in one of their less flashy vehicles, leaving his phone behind to avoid distraction. She smiled calmly as she explained this to friends and neighbors, her tone soft and concerned, yet confident. For the first day or two, no one thought much of it. Arlen was a private man, and his sudden solo adventures weren't entirely out of character. But by the third day, murmurs began to spread. Close friends hadn't heard from him. Business partners were missing calls. A meeting with a major investor had been skipped. Something entirely unlike Arlen. Still, Serika remained composed. She reassured everyone that he'd return soon, that he had simply needed time to think. It was only after a full week passed and Arlen's absence could no longer be explained away that Detective Roen Thace got involved. A quiet, sharp-minded investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, Roen didn't take long to sense something was wrong. He visited the Valen home for an initial wellness check. Serika greeted him at the door with poise and a gentle sadness in her eyes. She offered tea, spoke clearly, and guided him through her version of events, but beneath the surface, Roen noticed things that didn't sit right. The house was too clean. Immaculate, actually. More so than any home should naturally be. Especially one supposedly dealing with a personal crisis. Not a speck of dust, not a single fingerprint on the stainless steel appliances. It looked like a showroom rather than a living space. When asked about the last time she saw her husband, Serika described every detail as if rehearsed. The way he walked out the door, the clothes he wore, the bag he carried. Her story didn't change, but it lacked emotion, as though she had memorized a script. Roan quietly made note of it all. Neighbors came forward with odd stories. One couple said they heard strange noises late at night, a loud thump like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Another mentioned seeing lights on in the backyard around midnight, followed by the sound of digging. One teenage boy swore he saw Serika out in her garden at 2 a.m, but no one believed him at the time. The stories didn't amount to evidence, but they planted doubt. Rowan ordered a background check and quickly confirmed that no charges had been made to Arlen's credit cards since the night he allegedly left. The resort Serika mentioned had no record of his arrival. No toll booth cameras had captured his car. His GPS history ended at his home. Rowan asked to look through Arlen's office, hoping to find a journal, maybe a clue about his state of mind. Serika hesitated for a moment too long before agreeing. The office was neat, but Rowe noticed a faint chemical smell near the rug, something like industrial cleaner. He didn't mention it, just made a quiet mental note. On the shelves were Arlen's notebooks, filled with project sketches, reminders, and personal reflections. Roen scanned through them but found nothing pointing to a sudden trip. What he did find, tucked between pages, was a note Arlen had written weeks before. Too many things feel off lately. Need to secure everything. That sentence stuck with Rowan. What did Arlen mean by secure everything? Rowan asked Serika if Arlen had ever expressed concern for his safety. She shrugged, said no, and blamed stress from work. But Rowan felt the weight of something larger beginning to form. As the investigation quietly deepened, Serika continued her routine as if nothing had changed. She hosted a brunch, updated her social media with pictures of the garden, and played the grieving wife with subtle grace. But what she didn't realize was that Rowan had already begun looking into the home's digital systems. Arlen was a tech entrepreneur, after all. His home wasn't just beautiful, it was smart. And somewhere inside that perfectly controlled environment, the truth was waiting to be uncovered. Detective Roen Thace returned to the Valen estate with a quiet determination. He had already requested a forensic tech team to begin analyzing the home's internal systems. It was standard in high-profile disappearances, especially when the missing person had ties to the tech industry. What intrigued Rowan most was Arlen's cryptic journal note. Secure everything. That single phrase suggested Arlen anticipated something, perhaps even feared it. Rowan suspected there was more to the home than its sleek design and expensive furniture. Serika watched the investigators walk through the house with controlled grace. She smiled when appropriate, answered questions calmly, and never once appeared rattled. But inside, she was anything but composed. Every step they took across the floor echoed in her ears. She couldn't stop thinking about the plan she had executed so carefully, every detail, every step rehearsed, every trace supposedly erased. But now her thoughts were beginning to spiral. Was there something she had missed? Could Arlen have left something behind? Roan and his team focused on the home's smart systems. Arlen had installed custom software to manage security, lighting, temperature, and even voice-activated assistance. But there was a hidden layer, an encrypted cloud-based backup system that didn't show up on the home's standard dashboard. It took the techs a few hours to uncover the access point hidden within the digital logs of the garage system. Once inside, they found what Arlen had been trying to secure. There were hours of surveillance footage, discreetly recorded from nearly invisible cameras placed in vents, light fixtures, and corners of rooms. The footage dated back several months and captured more than just ordinary life. It showed Serika moving through the house late at night with gloves on. It showed her handling bottles of industrial chemicals, digging in the garden at odd hours, and removing sections of the rug from Arlen's office. Most chillingly, it captured a full recording of the night Arlen disappeared. The video showed Arlen entering the kitchen late at night. He poured himself a drink and stood by the window. Minutes later, Serika walked in behind him. What followed was calculated and horrifying. She had drugged his drink. He collapsed, and she calmly dragged his body down the hallway. The footage ended with her opening the basement door and disappearing into the darkness below. There were no screams, no panic, only silence and precision. Rowan watched the footage in grim silence. The recordings were enough for a warrant, and within hours, the property was sealed off. A specialized forensic team began digging through the garden where the teenager claimed to have seen Serika that night. It didn't take long for them to find disturbed soil. 3 feet beneath the surface, they uncovered a sealed container wrapped in plastic. Inside was Arlen's body, preserved, lifeless, and unmistakably murdered. Serika was arrested the same day. As the officers placed her in handcuffs, her face barely changed. It was as if she had known this moment was coming, but hadn't expected it so soon. She remained quiet, offering no resistance, no confession, no emotion. The media quickly descended on Bellspire Hollow, and the story spread like wildfire. The perfect wife, as they once called her, had become a calculated killer. Her fall from grace was dramatic, cold, and deeply unsettling. But the shock didn't end there. As investigators continued to comb through the footage Arlen had saved, they found more recordings, videos of Serika alone in various rooms, speaking softly to herself, rehearsing scenarios, even laughing. In one clip, she sat on the edge of the bed, whispering her plans into the air as if she were talking to an invisible audience. It was no longer just a case of murder, it became a case of obsession, control, and delusion. Roen realized this wasn't just about a woman eliminating her husband. It was about someone who had been building her fantasy of freedom for years, who believed she could erase another person and walk away untouched. But Erlen had known. He may not have stopped her, but he made sure she would never truly get away with it. The courtroom was filled with quiet tension as Serika Valen entered, dressed in a modest gray outfit with her hair pulled back tightly. The cameras clicked in the background, the press scribbled notes, and the public watched with morbid curiosity. This was not just a trial, it was a spectacle. The woman once admired for her poise and beauty now stood accused of one of the most cold-blooded murders the town had ever seen. And while the evidence was overwhelming, the prosecution knew they had to dismantle the carefully built image Serika had spent years maintaining. From the moment the trial began, the prosecution laid out their case in a slow, methodical fashion. They presented the surveillance footage first, those haunting clips that showed Serika's movements in the days leading up to Arlen's death. Each video was played for the jury in full view of Serika, whose expression remained eerily neutral throughout. She didn't flinch when they showed her dragging Arlen's body. She didn't blink when they played audio of her whispering to herself in the bedroom, practicing how she'd explain his disappearance. It was as if she had emotionally disconnected from the world around her. Witnesses were brought forward: the neighbor who heard noises, the teenager who saw her digging, the friend who recalled Serika's oddly calm demeanor during the search. Every piece of testimony chipped away at the illusion she had crafted. But perhaps the most damning witness was the digital forensics expert, who explained in simple terms how Arlen's secret recording system had worked and how it had saved every moment without Serika ever noticing. It was a final act of protection. A ghost's message from beyond the grave. In her defense, Serika's legal team tried to argue mental instability. They painted her as a woman driven to desperation by years of emotional neglect. They claimed she had lost her sense of reality, that she had become trapped in a life where her voice was never heard. They called a psychologist who suggested Serika had developed a detachment disorder, leading her to commit the crime in a dissociative state. But the jury didn't see a woman overcome by trauma. They saw someone who had planned every moment of the murder, someone who had practiced smiling in the mirror before faking concern, someone who had calmly watched her husband die and then hosted a brunch the following week. During the trial, a new piece of evidence emerged: an encrypted journal that had been hidden in Serika's private cloud storage. Investigators discovered it after tracing her smart device usage. The journal was filled with chilling entries written in cold, analytical language. She had rated potential murder methods based on difficulty and cleanup. She described her feelings after Arlen's death, not with sorrow, but with relief. One entry simply read, "It's finally quiet in here." The courtroom fell silent when that was read aloud. Outside the courthouse, the public was divided. Some believed Serika had snapped under pressure, others saw her as the embodiment of evil. Online forums lit up with theories, comparisons to other infamous killers, and debates over her motives. But inside the courtroom, only the facts mattered, and the facts were impossible to ignore. When the jury returned with a verdict, the tension in the room thickened. Serika stood still, hands folded, lips pressed into a faint line. The foreperson read the words slowly, clearly. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence followed soon after, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Still, Serika didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't show remorse. As she was led out of the courtroom, her head remained high, eyes forward, posture perfect. It was the final performance of a woman who had once believed she could control everything, even death. But the truth had slipped through the cracks she never saw. Arlen had ensured that the story she tried to bury would one day rise to the surface, frame by frame, second by second, and expose her for what she truly was. Serika Valen was transferred to the state's maximum suppression on the overseer's guard, under heavy guard. Even behind bars, her presence drew attention. Inmates stared, some whispered, and others simply watched with cold fascination. She wasn't treated like a celebrity. She was treated like someone dangerous, someone unpredictable. The guards kept a close eye on her, not because they feared she'd act out violently, but because she exuded a strange kind of control, even in confinement. Her posture remained perfect, her tone polite, and her silence unnerving. Inside her small, concrete cell, Serika adjusted quickly. She never complained, never cried, never spoke unnecessarily. She followed the rules, ate her meals quietly, and kept her space spotless. But something deeper had changed. There were no mirrors in her cell, yet she still imagined her reflection. She still rehearsed lines in her head, still replayed conversations, still lived within the performance she had once crafted so carefully for the outside world. In her mind, she was not a prisoner. She was a misunderstood strategist who had simply lost control of the narrative. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the story of Serika Valen refused to fade. True crime podcasts released multi-part episodes. A best-selling author published a book titled The Quietest Killer, diving deep into her background, her marriage, and the shocking footage that had sealed her fate. Documentaries followed, dissecting every inch of her home, interviewing neighbors, and overlaying slow-mashing clips of her final hours before arrest. Serika became a symbol of manipulation, of obsession, of cold calculation. But not everyone was satisfied with the ending. Some internet sleuths began digging into Arlen's business for records, convinced there was more to the story. They believed that Serika may have killed before. One theory suggested that a former assistant of Arlen's who had gone missing years prior had crossed Serika somehow. Another theory pointed to an old photograph of Serika as a teenager standing beside a foster parent who later died under unclear circumstances. These weren't proven, but they added to the chilling mystique that surrounded her. Inside the prison, Serika received letters, hundreds of them. Some were from people seeking answers, others expressed admiration, a few were disturbing. But she rarely responded. She kept the ones she found useful and destroyed the rest. In time, she began writing again, though not to communicate. She filled notebooks with thoughts, lists, and theories. She cataloged her prison surroundings in eerie detail, noting guard schedules, inmate behavior patterns, and escape routes she'd never actually use. It wasn't about escape. It was about staying in control, even in a place designed to strip it away. One day, during a routine cell check, a guard stumbled upon a sealed envelope inside Serika's mattress. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Inside was a single page. It read, "They all watched, but none of them saw it, not even him." The message was vague, cryptic, and chilling. Prison officials reviewed it carefully but found no immediate threat. Still, they transferred her to a more isolated unit just in case. As the years passed, Serika faded from the headlines, replaced by newer tragedies and scandals. But in the quiet halls of the prison, she remained a myth, a figure inmates warned each other about. Some said she could read people's thoughts. Others claimed she had predicted the death of a fellow inmate just days before it happened. Whether true or not, the stories made her untouchable. What no one realized was that Serika had one more secret, hidden deep in a secure cloud server, unconnected to the system Arlen had uncovered, was a second archive of recordings. Not of the murder, but of conversations, meetings, and moments captured across her marriage. A library of manipulation, a record of every time she felt ignored, slighted, or dismissed. And in her final entry, dated just a week before Arlen's death, she had written, "If no one sees you, make sure they remember what happens when they finally do."